Before we consider the geography of Jerusalem, I thought I'd just give you some interesting facts about Israel. And I've collected these facts and just like to share them. You know, Israel has two official languages. Of course, Hebrew is one of the official languages, but Arabic is also one of the official languages in Israel. The population of Israel is about 8,500,000, and Jews make up 75% of that. Arabs make up the 20%, and then a variety of other nationalities, the other 5%. There is only one state-recognized religion in Israel, and that is Orthodox Judaism. And it's only the Orthodox Jewish rabbis that are authorized to perform weddings. So if you're Jewish but not Orthodox Jewish, you've got to go to Cyprus in order to have your wedding. Only the Orthodox rabbis are authorized to officiate in a Jewish wedding in the land of Israel. There is complete religious freedom to believe what you want to believe in the land of Israel, and you can tell other people about Jesus if you believe in Jesus. There's laws against paying someone to come to believe in Jesus, but you can share your faith in Israel just like you can share your faith here in the United States. It's also interesting to note that almost 2 million Palestinians, Arab people, are Israeli citizens and have a right to vote just as much as the Israelis do in the land of Israel. They were those Arabs who stayed within the borders of Israel when Israel became a state rather than fleeing. And they were granted citizenship just like the Jews were when Israel became a state. About 5,000 of the Jewish people in the land of Israel believe in Jesus. Some estimate that there is as many as 20,000 who are Messianic believers. But the numbers are hard to figure out because not every person who believes in Jesus lets that be known because of the persecution that comes along with that. In terms of a geography note, the Dead Sea is the lowest point on the Earth's crust. It's 13,000 feet below sea level, and actually below the surface of the Dead Sea, it's another 1,300. Did I say 13,000? 1,300 feet below sea level, the shores of the Dead Sea, and it's another 1,300 feet below the shores of the Dead Sea to the bottom of the Dead Sea. So you've got a crack in the Earth's crust that's about 2,600 feet deep. That's a pretty significant crack. Well, those are just a few notes, just one more. By law, the glue on Israeli postage stamps has to be kosher because the Jews lick their stamps, and you don't want to lick a non-kosher stamp. Well, those are just a few interesting points about the land of Israel. We are studying about Jerusalem in our second hour, and I want to begin by reading from a psalm, Psalm 122. Psalm 122 says, I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. From whence come my help? My help comes from the Lord who made the heavens and the earth. He will not allow your foot to slip. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will not slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is the shade in your right hand. The sun will not smite you by day, nor moon by night. The Lord will protect you. You know, I'm actually reading the wrong psalm. I was wondering why this wasn't making sense to me. I was reading Psalm 121. I meant to be reading 122. So let me start again. I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Our feet are standing within your gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem that is built, a city that is compact together, to which the tribes go up, even the tribes of the Lord, an ordinance of the Lord, to give thanks to the name of the Lord. For their thrones were set for judgment, thrones of the house of David. Pray for the shalom of Jerusalem, the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. May shalom be within your walls and prosperity within your palace. For the sake of my brothers and my friends, I will now say, may shalom, peace, be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your good. The name Jerusalem, it's used 834 times in the Bible, and the name means the city of the foundation of peace. Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, as it's pronounced in Hebrew. The original name of the city was Salem, which is linked with the name Shalom, peace, and may have been a reference to a Canaanite god who was believed in by the people of that city. The name Salem is only used 3 times in the Bible, always with reference to Jerusalem or Jerusalem. Josephus gives us quite a thorough description of the city of Jerusalem in his Jewish War. Josephus was living just after the time of Jesus. Jesus died in AD 33. Josephus was born in AD 37. But he gives us an account of what it was like among the Jewish people in the land of Israel during the 1st century. And he tells us about the Jewish War. He tells us about Jerusalem. He tells us about the various Jewish groups, the Jewish Pharisees, Sadducees, the Essenes, the Zealots. So he gives us a very thorough description of the city of Jerusalem. Where is Jerusalem located? It's easy to find. All you need to do is see where the Dead Sea is located on a map in Jerusalem. Then you go left from the north end of the Dead Sea about 1/3 of the way toward the Mediterranean Sea, and there is Jerusalem. It's about 33 miles from the Mediterranean Sea. It's about 15 miles west of the Jordan River, and it's actually located in the tribe of Benjamin. We usually associate Jerusalem with the tribe of Judah because it was the capital of the southern kingdom, but it was actually located in Benjaminite territory. Jerusalem sits at an elevation of about 2,500 feet above sea level, so it's in the mountains. Jerusalem is in the mountains, it's surrounded by mountains, and it's just a little bit to the east of that watershed route. If you're going north and south through the land of Israel, along the spine, the watershed route, you're going to have to step off that route and go a little bit low to reach the city of Jerusalem. Although Jerusalem was the capital, it was actually located in the territory of Benjamin. Why was Jerusalem founded as a city? Well, in ancient times, you needed 4 things to have a city. 4 things were required. First thing you needed was water. You can't have a city and population without water. And Jerusalem had access to the Gihon spring, which is a strong water source and is still a source of water in the city of Jerusalem today. It's an unfailing source of water. A second thing an ancient city needed was a defensive location. And this was usually, cities were usually built on the top of a mountain with steep slopes surrounding it. And Jerusalem has that. On the east, on the west, on the south, there are steep slopes around the ancient city of Jerusalem. Only on the north was there not a steep slope. And so there was, on the north, it was most vulnerable to attack. But the city of Jerusalem was well situated for defense in ancient warfare. A third thing you would look for in founding a city would be a location along main travel routes. And Jerusalem was certainly along the main north-south travel route, going through the spine, through that watershed route, north and south, through the land. It was also accessible from the west, from Joppa, and from the east, from Jericho. And you could go to Jericho up to Jerusalem, you could go to Joppa up to Jerusalem, so Jerusalem was well situated. There's one other thing that was necessary to found an ancient city, and that was an agricultural situation where you could raise your crops, you could grow wheat. And Jerusalem didn't have any large fields. It was in a mountainous region with steep valleys all around it, so it really didn't have an agricultural situation for it to prosper. So what made up for that lack of an agricultural situation? What made up for it was the fact that Jerusalem became a pilgrimage site, a place where people would come and worship. And tourists from the north and from the south and from the east and the west would come up to Jerusalem 3 times a year, bringing their money and needing to buy goods and place to stay and food to eat while they were in Jerusalem for these religious festivals. So from ancient times and continuing to today, Jerusalem makes its money off tourists. And you'll be a little bit surprised by the high prices in Jerusalem, but that's part of the deal. That's the only way Jerusalem can survive, is by charging high prices to the tourists. But it's worth it. And when people begin to complain about the expenses and the high prices, I just say, hey, That's part of the Jerusalem experience. So Jerusalem was chosen for its religious significance and became a place of pilgrimage for the Jewish people. God wanted Jerusalem to be the place where people would gather to worship, the place where his temple would be located. And of course the tabernacle was first there, and then the temple was built by Solomon. That temple was destroyed in 586 by the Babylonians. And then a second temple was built by the Jews when they returned from Babylonian captivity. That temple was destroyed by Antiochus Epiphanes, and it was desecrated. It was desecrated by Antiochus Epiphanes. And then the altar and the temple was cleansed by the Maccabees. That second temple was then enlarged and remodeled by King Herod. And that's the temple that's before us today, the Jerusalem temple that was remodeled and refurbished by King Herod. It's a beautiful model of Herod's temple. And because of the religious significance of the city of Jerusalem, Jerusalem was regarded by ancient scholars as the navel of the earth. And it really was the center of the earth, with Europe to the northwest, Africa to the south, Asia to the northeast. Jerusalem is the center of the world. And there's a video, PBS home video, and notice the title there, Jerusalem, the center of the world. And the Jewish rabbis called it the navel of the earth. Jerusalem truly is central. Well, the topography of Jerusalem is reflected in a comment in Psalm 125. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people. And the mountains literally surround Jerusalem. We're looking from the south of Jerusalem toward the Temple Mount area. You can see the temple platform, that flat temple platform. But underneath the temple platform is Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah is the Temple Mount where the Jerusalem temple was built in ancient times. To the east of Mount Moriah, you have the Mount of Olives. To the south of Mount Moriah, you've got Mount Zion, and you've got what is known as the Mount of Evil Council, where the UN headquarters is located. To the west of Mount Moriah, you've got the Western Hill. Jerusalem is literally surrounded by mountains. And so it's exactly what the text says in Psalm 125, verse 2. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people. The ridge on which Jerusalem is located is actually hidden from view along the watershed route. You have to go to the east of the watershed route to look down on Jerusalem because it's surrounded by these ridges. I want you to be able to sketch a map of Jerusalem. So let's imagine that we are going to the fair, and at the fair we want to eat a hot dog. So there it is, a hot dog. And the hot dog in our little schematic is going to represent the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives isn't a mountain peak, it's a ridge. And it's east of the city of Jerusalem. So we eat our hot dog and we decide we'd really like some dessert. So we're going to buy an ice cream cone with a big scoop of lime ice cream on the top. And the cone represents the city of David, Zion, the fortress of Zion. And the scoop of ice cream on the top represents Mount Moriah. Now notice that between the hot dog and our ice cream cone there's a valley. It's the Kidron Valley. And to the west of the Kidron Valley is Zion, the fortress of Zion, which was David's city. And just north of that is Mount Moriah, the place where Abraham offered Isaac, the place where David built his altar, the place where Solomon built the temple. Well, our mother always told us to make sure we had some vegetables during the day, and so rather than call it an ice cream cone, we're going to call it a fork. And so we're going to have a fork with two peas on it. And the pea on the left represents the Western Hill, the hill to the west of Mount Zion. The pea to the north of Mount Zion represents Mount Moriah. But notice there are three valleys. The Hinnom Valley is to the south of the Western Hill. And then we've got the Central Valley between the Western Hill and Mount Moriah. And then we've got the Kidron Valley. So we've got three mountains, the Western Mountain, Mount Moriah, and Mount of Olives. And we've got three valleys, the Central Valley, the Hinnom Valley, or Hinnom Valley, and the Kidron Valley. And this schematic kind of represents Jerusalem and its physical features. So hopefully that's something you can kind of remember, get your handle on, and sketch that hot dog and that ice cream cone with a little P on the top and another P to the left with a valley below it, which turns it all into a fork. And if you can just imagine that in your mind's eye, you can know three valleys and three mountains in the land, in the city of Jerusalem. Mount of Olives, Mount Moriah, the Western Hill, the Hinnom Valley, the Central Valley, and the Kidron Valley. And central to it all is that cone representing Mount Zion, the city of David. Now we've got a relief map to look at. So let's see if we can identify on this relief map what we've looked at on the schematic. The Mount of Olives is actually off the relief map a little bit to the east there. But then we can see, in addition to the Mount of Olives, Mount Moriah, where the temple was eventually built, and the Western Hill. You can also see the valleys, the Hinnom Valley, which is south of the Western Hill, south and to the west and south of the Western Hill. And in the Central Valley, you can see the Central Valley. And then you can see the Kidron Valley that is between Mount Zion and also the Mount of Olives. So take a close look at that schematic, that relief map. And now we're going to look at an aerial view, looking down without the names. We're going to look at the valley, the L-shaped valley on the south and to the west of Jerusalem. That's the Hinnom Valley. And then you can see the Central Valley going right up through the center part of our relief map, and then the Kidron Valley, and these three valleys together form the fork. You see that? And then we've got the Western Hill, we've got Mount Moriah, where the Temple Mount was located, and then we've got the Mount of Olives. So that gives you an idea of the physical geography of the city of Jerusalem. And you can see the sketch here where the ancient walls of Jerusalem are located. And on the right of that, we see the temple platform. And the little figure on the left side is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, or the Church of the Resurrection. Now we get to the aerial photographs, and we're looking from the Mount of Olives, over the Mount of Olives, toward the Mediterranean Sea. We're looking from the east to the west. And you can see on the left, there's an L-shaped valley that joins the two other valleys, and that valley would extend out to the sea, out to the Dead Sea. And then the first yellow line there represents the Kidron Valley, and the second yellow line represents the Central Valley. In the immediate foreground, we're looking down on a Jewish cemetery. The next thing we see is the temple platform with the golden dome of the rock. Beyond that is the old city of Jerusalem, and beyond that is the city of New Jerusalem with all its skyscrapers. But you can see the physical topography here with these main valleys. Now we're looking the opposite direction, and in the foreground we have the L-shaped Hinnom Valley, which joins the other two valleys, the Kidron Valley that goes out to the Dead Sea. You can also see the Central Valley between the two main valleys, the L-shaped Hinnom Valley and the Kidron Valley. You can see the Central Valley goes right through the old city of Jerusalem. And then the Kidron Valley between the old city of Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives. So you can see and trace these valleys. Whenever you're in Jerusalem, you're either going up or down. You're going up a hill or down a hill, through a valley, out of a valley, in traveling around the old city of Jerusalem. It's a lot of walking in this old city of Jerusalem. We're a little closer, and you can see the L-shaped Hinnom Valley, the deep Hinnom Valley in the immediate foreground. And just above the L-shaped Hinnom Valley is what is known as the Western Hill. It doesn't look too much like a hill from this perspective, but there is a hill there. And then we've got the Central Valley, and you've got the Dome of the Rock, the Golden Dome of the Rock, and beyond that, the Kidron Valley. And all of these valleys join together to go out to the Dead Sea. Now, you don't have the valleys actually depicted with this slide, but perhaps you can still see the valleys. Maybe you can see in the foreground the Kidron Valley, and just beyond the city of David, that Central Valley. And then on the far side of the photograph toward the top, you can see just a little bit of the Hinnom Valley. So kind of stretching your imaginations here to pick out these valleys from this aerial photograph. Now, just to review, we've got the L-shaped Hinnom Valley, and we're going to take a closer look at that valley in the next picture. So there it is. We've got the L-shaped Hinnom Valley with the red dots. And just beyond that L-shaped Hinnom Valley is the Jerusalem University College, where I get to take students to study the land of the Bible. You can see the walls around the old city. And these walls were actually built by Suleiman the Magnificent. He was a Turkish ruler in the time of Martin Luther, about in the 1500s. This Ottoman ruler built the walls which you see today. This is Jerusalem in the 1850s, mid-1850s, a view from the Mamila Pool toward Jaffa Gate. And Jaffa Gate is one of the main gates of the city. And this is the Hinnom Valley. On the left, you're looking south toward the Sultan's Pool. And you can see all the sheep and the animals being gathered to that pool to drink. And you're looking the very opposite direction on the right up toward the Jaffa Gate. These are 1800 pictures, what Jerusalem looked like quite a long time ago. This is the way it looks today. And here you see the Hinnom Valley with its nice park area. We're looking toward the south, toward where the junction of the Hinnom Valley and the Kidron Valley, where they meet together. And here looking down on this photograph, you can see part of the crevice of the Hinnom Valley. This valley had a bad reputation in Old Testament times because it was here in the Hinnom Valley that Ahaz and Manasseh carried out child sacrifice to Baal and Moloch. Here we see the junction of the Hinnom Valley and the Kidron Valley, and they join together, and the drainage continues on out to the Dead Sea. The next valley we want to look at is the Central Valley, which Josephus calls us the Tyropian Valley, which means the valley of the cheesemakers. Apparently the folks in this valley made cheese. And Josephus in the Jewish War talks about this valley as the valley of the cheesemakers. And the Tyropian Valley is just about obliterated by fill today. When the city of Jerusalem was destroyed and rebuilt, and destroyed and rebuilt, all the building materials, all the debris kind of filled in this Central Valley. So it's kind of hard to pick out unless you're walking through it, and then you can see there is an actual valley. But through this valley, you can go actually through the Dung Gate and up through the city of Jerusalem all the way to the Damascus Gate. And this route today is known as El Wad in Arabic, simply meaning the valley. And here's another view. We're looking the opposite direction toward the Central Valley, which goes right through the ancient city of Jerusalem. You can go from the Damascus Gate all through the city of Jerusalem down to the Dung Gate, all part of this Central Valley. The Central Valley can be seen here between David City, which is this appendage which hangs down from the temple area, and the Western Hill to the left. And although I've not highlighted it in red, I think you can pick out the Central Valley. And this picture was taken about 1970, before a lot of the building and excavation was done in this area. Now the Kidron Valley. And the Kidron Valley separates the Mount Moriah and the city of David from the Mount of Olives. It would be that valley on the right. We're looking across the old city of Jerusalem to the Mount of Olives. And you can see on the Mount of Olives there's a couple of towers. There's the tower on the left, which is the tower of the Augusta Victoria Hospital. The tower in the center is the tower dedicated to the Ascension of Jesus. It's a Russian Orthodox church tower. And between the city of Jerusalem and that ridge of the Mount of Olives is a bit of a shadow, and in that shadow is the Kidron Valley. Notice up on the upper right-hand corner of the photograph, you can see the Dead Sea, which is only 15 miles away from the city of Jerusalem. And here in red is the Kidron Valley. The Kidron Valley is mentioned in the life of David. David, when he was fleeing from Absalom, crossed the Kidron Valley as he fled from the city of Jerusalem. Later, Jesus and his disciples crossed the Kidron Valley, John 18, verse 1, when they made their way to the Garden of Gethsemane. There is, and here you can see a nice view of the Kidron Valley between the city of David and the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is the green ridge on the right, the city of David just south of the Dome of the Rock and the temple platform. So here we have the city of David between the Kidron Valley and the Central Valley. And the city of David, Ir David in Hebrew, the Jebusite city that David captured and made his capital, is located right between these two valleys. And you can see the Kidron Valley here in the shadow, with the Mount of Olives on the right and the Mount Moriah on the left. And you can see the temple platform with the southeast corner of the temple platform identified by many as the pinnacle of the temple. There's one other valley, and it follows the line of a street through the old city of Jerusalem called David Street. And this is the transversal valley that goes from the Jaffa Gate to the temple area. It's the transversal valley. And you actually walk through this valley when you go down David Street from the Jaffa Gate down to the temple area. And it's depicted here in red. This is a valley that's important to the discussion of the walls of Jerusalem, because this was what Josephus refers to as the line of the first wall of the city of Jerusalem. And here it is depicted on this map, the transversal valley, the line of Josephus' first wall. When they were seeking to build the walls around Jerusalem, this is the first wall that was built. We talked about the valleys, now the hills. And here is Zion, which is about 2,200 feet above sea level. It's the location of the city of David, and it was the place that David captured and made his capital and his fortress. The city of Zion, or the Mount Zion, or the city of David. And here you see it in this aerial photograph with Mount Zion just below the Temple Mount here, and these are two parallel photographs. The reference to Ophel is the transitional zone between the city of David and the temple area. And the word Ophel means swelling. So this is kind of a swelling area, a hog's back area between Mount Moriah and the city of David. Here we're looking south from the city of David. Silwan village is on our left. The Kidron Valley goes along our left there, and we're actually standing in the city of David, David's city. And now we're looking north along the city of David to the Temple Mount area. And on our right would be the Kidron Valley. The excavations in the foreground are part of the ancient city of David. More of the excavations of the city of David with a view to the south. And David built this city as his capital and built his palace there. This is some of the excavations that are being done at the city of David. These are current excavations, so they continue to dig there on the city of David. Mount Moriah is the place where Abraham offered Isaac, where David built an altar, and later Solomon built a temple. Mount Moriah is about 2,400 feet above sea level, and although the mountain itself has been obscured by the temple platform, you can kind of see the line of Mount Moriah here with the red marking. And this was the location of the threshing floor that David bought from Ornan the Jebusite and built an altar there. And later Solomon built the temple, and this was the place where the Dome of the Rock is located today. It's actually a 35-acre temple platform. You're looking at a 35-acre temple platform. When Herod remodeled the temple, he enlarged the temple platform to accommodate all the worshipers and visitors that would come up to Jerusalem for the various feasts. And you can go up on this platform today and visit the site. You can't go in the Dome of the Rock. That's prohibited except for Muslims. But you can go up on the temple platform and imagine what it was like in the time of Jesus. This is the Dome of the Rock with all its beautiful Arabic inscriptions and tiles. The inscriptions say, God is one, he's not three. For God forbid that he should have a son. So it's basically, in this statement, it's saying that Jesus is not God. And it's an argument against the Trinity, all engraved on these tiles around the Dome of the Rock. The western hill is where Jerusalem expanded when they needed more living space. And this area is traditionally known as Mount Zion, but we know it's not. It's a later addition to the city. And here you can see Mount Zion in the foreground. This is where the Jerusalem University College is located. Jaffa Gate is to the left. That's one of the main entrances into the city. The Zion Gate is just beyond Mount Zion, and then the Dung Gate. So we're looking at the western hill and three gates that gave access to the old city of Jerusalem. And here you can see a little bit of this western hill. It actually does look something like a hill at this point. And you can see the JUC, that's the Jerusalem University College. The dominant feature on the western hill is the Church of Dormition. And this is the place where it's believed that Mary slept. She didn't die because she ascended into heaven, but she slept here and then ascended into heaven according to Catholic tradition. You can also see the Hinnom Valley there in the foreground. The Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is a ridge that runs north and south just east of the Kidron Valley. It's first mentioned in 2 Samuel chapter 15, and David is depicted as ascending the Mount of Olives when he flees Jerusalem during Absalom's revolt. And so there you see the ridge of the Mount of Olives east of the Kidron Valley, east of the city of Jerusalem. The ridge has on it three towers that distinguish this ridge: the Hebrew University Tower, the Augusta Victoria Hospital Tower, and the Russian Tower of the Ascension. And you can see the ridge and these towers from great distances around the land. You go up to the Benjamin territory, you look south, you see this ridge and these towers. You go down toward the Dead Sea, you can see this ridge and these towers. These are very visible identifiers of the Mount of Olives and the city of Jerusalem. You recall how Jesus frequented the Mount of Olives, and here we're looking at the Mount of Olives just east of the temple area with the Garden of Gethsemane and the Church of All Nations there in the foreground, the Russian Orthodox Church with its onion-shaped bulbs commemorating Mary Magdalene and her ministry in the life of Jesus. And so we're looking at the Mount of Olives here. And this is the southern end of the Mount of Olives from the city of David. And in the foreground is the Kidron Valley with the Mount of Olives in the background. And notice all the gravestones. This is a Jewish cemetery. It's been a Jewish cemetery for thousands of years, and it still is in use there. It's believed by the Jews that the resurrection will take place on the Mount of Olives. So they want to be the first to be raised, and they believe that they'll be raised first if they're buried on the Mount of Olives. I'd like to show you some aerial photographs from Google Earth looking down on the city of Jerusalem. This will help clarify some of the things we've talked about. So up in the air, looking down on the city of Jerusalem, you can see outlined in yellow is the old city of Jerusalem. We've talked about these valleys. You can see the Hinnom Valley, the L-shaped Hinnom Valley, the Tyropian Valley going right through the city of Jerusalem. We call it the Central Valley. And then the Kidron Valley. And then just to the right of the Kidron Valley, we have the ridge of the Mount of Olives with 3 towers, the Hebrew University Bell Tower, the Augusta Victoria Hospital Tower, and the Russian Orthodox Church of the Ascension Tower. Here we see not only the hills, but also and the valleys, but also some springs. We see the Gihon spring on the south. This is where Adonijah proclaimed himself king. And David was aroused to identify Solomon as king. And Adonijah had his friends celebrating at Enrogel, that spring in the south. Solomon was anointed at the Gihon spring, the main water source of the city. You can see the major valleys and the hills as well, Mount Zion, and the city of David, and the Temple Mount in this photograph. The city of Jerusalem is divided into 4 sectors, 4 quarters, and each have an identifying ethnic group associated with it. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, that's the Christian quarter, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is the place that celebrates Christ's death and resurrection. And then you have the Armenian quarter, which is just to the south of that, and that's where you have the Armenian folks and their Church of St. James. And then you have the western, you've got the Jewish quarter with the western wall, and that's where the Jewish people reside. And then to the north of that, you've got the Arab quarter, and they celebrate and worship at the temple platform and the Dome of the Rock. So Jerusalem's 4 quarters divided among the 4 ethnic groups: the Christians, the Armenians, the Jews, and the Arabs. And here the names are presented for you: the Christian quarter, the Armenian quarter, the Jewish quarter, and the Muslim quarter. The Armenians are from eastern Turkey, and they are an ethnic group that were persecuted by the Turks. About 1 million of them were martyred or killed during what is referred to as the Armenian Holocaust. These are not the followers of Josephus Arminius. They are the Armenians. These are the Armenians. And the Armenians are an ethnic group. The Armenians are more of a theological tradition following after Josephus Arminius, who debated with Calvin over the issue of free will and divine sovereignty. We have the gates of the city. Notice in the north we've got the Damascus Gate. To the left of that, the New Gate. The Jaffa Gate is one of the main gates of the city. And then continuing on around, we've got the Zion Gate, the Tanner's Gate, the Dung Gate, which was basically the gate through which the garbage of the ancient city was dumped. And then the Golden Gate, just east of the temple area, St. Stephen's Gate, and then Herod's Gate in the north, more of a modern gate. So here we have the gates of the ancient city of Jerusalem, looking down on this ancient city. A little bit more about the city of Jerusalem, its climate. About 32 degrees latitude. Oregon is 45 degrees latitude. So we're in just a little bit of a cooler climate, a more northern climate than the land of Israel. But the land of Israel has a very pleasant climate. You've got a warm sunshine that is very pleasant during the chilly winters. When you live in the mountains and you get a little bit of snow, it's nice to have a warm sunshine. You also have a Mediterranean sea breeze that we've mentioned before that brings cooling relief to the hot sun during the summer. Jerusalem is in the mountains, and it does get wet and windy during the winter. You get an average rainfall of about 25 inches of rain in the land of Israel. And you get a heavy snowfall every once in a while. The snow is usually quite wet and heavy, and traffic comes to a stop, and the trees, branches break. there in the heavy snowfall. I remember my daughter, who was living in Jerusalem for a year, we called her one day and she said, "Daddy, Daddy, it's snowing in Jerusalem." She was thrilled about that. This is the Hamsin. This is the hot desert wind that blows into the land, often in a transitional season, and it brings this hot, dry, dusty air. And this was on May 11, 2007, and notice all the dust in the air. We're looking across the Hinnom Valley toward the Scottish church, and just look at this picture for a moment, and then look at this picture. It's the same picture, but it's a few days later. This picture was on the 11th of May, and this picture is on the 14th of May. And notice how the air has cleared. All the dust has dissipated, and you've got a very pleasant situation again in Jerusalem. In ancient times, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, when the inhabitants of Jerusalem were few, rainwater was collected in the winter and stored in cisterns. And the cisterns are basically like a water reservoir dug out from the ground. And here you have a first temple cistern and a second temple cistern. These are water reservoirs dug out of the limestone. If you just left the water in the limestone, it would seep through the limestone and go away. So they plastered the walls of the cistern so that the water wouldn't go away. As the population grew, they needed larger and larger cisterns to provide water. And this is a huge cistern. It's an underground reservoir that is located in the Garden of Gethsemane. Excuse me, not the Garden of Gethsemane, the garden tomb, the traditional garden tomb. But this reservoir would be filled with the winter rains, and then during the summer, when you didn't have rain, the water would be taken out to water the garden. The Gihon spring was a main water source from ancient times, and it's mentioned in 1 Kings 1, verse 33, as the place where Solomon was anointed king. And the name Gihon means gusher, and it gushes forth on a regular basis, supplying water for the ancient city. The spring was actually outside the city walls, and so there was steps taken to gain access to the spring by a shaft identified today as Warren Shaft, and this gave access to the spring for those living inside the city wall. You can see the spring was outside the wall. How did you get to that spring if you had enemy besieging your city? Well, you went through Warren's Shaft and dropped your bucket down to the spring. And here's another picture of Warren Shaft, where you could drop your bucket down and get access from the Gihon spring. There was another water source called En Rogel, and this was actually a well rather than a spring, but again, it's just south of the city of Jerusalem and a little bit south of the Gihon spring. From the Gihon spring, Hezekiah made a channel, carved it in stone, in the limestone, to bring water from the spring, which was outside the city, to a reservoir that was inside the city. And this reservoir is known as the Pool of Siloam. And you can actually walk through that ancient tunnel built by Hezekiah's workmen in preparation for the attack by Sennacherib. In the dedication of this tunnel, an inscription was carved on the wall of the tunnel in archaic Hebrew, describing how the tunnelers worked from both directions and met in the center, and the water flowed. This inscription is located in the Istanbul Archaeological Museum. It was hacked away from the wall, stolen, and taken out of the country by thieves. And today you can't find it in the city of Jerusalem. You have to go to Istanbul to see this inscription. The water channel went actually underneath the city of David and came out to a pool, and the pool that is depicted here was formerly thought to be the Pool of Siloam. But more recently, archaeologists have identified another pool as the Pool of Siloam. This picture shows the path of this channel, underground tunnel that was built to carry the water from the Gihon spring to the Pool of Siloam. And remember, the Pool of Siloam was where Jesus sent the blind man in John chapter 9 to wash, and when he had done so, he came away being able to see. A great miracle took place. He made his way to the pool of Siloam blind, but when he reached the pool, he washed his eyes as Jesus had instructed, and he was able to see. And here we are looking at the pool of Siloam, and the excavation is going on here at this pool. And so this pool has recently been discovered and identified as the pool of Siloam. There's also some reference in Isaiah 8:6, to the waters of Shiloah. And these waters were a irrigation system that came from the spring of Gihon to water the gardens in the Kidron Valley, which were important for the people living in the city of David. So they had some small gardens. This wasn't a big farm, but there were some small gardens watered by this channel called the waters of Shiloah. And this it was an ancient watering system, an ancient irrigation system actually built by the Canaanites. We've got the old pool of Siloam in red and the new pool of Siloam, as it's been identified, in yellow. And these two pools were close together, but in the discovery of the new pool of Siloam, they've discovered this was the original pool, and the pool that is identified by the words in red is simply part of the channel of the Siloam tunnel, part of the channel, not the actual pool. Here we are again at the pool of Siloam. Now notice that only part of it has been excavated. The steps would go down, and it's thought by the excavators that these steps would be on all four sides of this large pool, which was a source of water for the ancient people and was inside the city limits, inside the city walls, so it would have been protected from attack. But it's also been suggested that this pool was a place where Jews would come to do their ritual immersions. They would not only get their water there, but they would immerse themselves there for the purposes of ritual purity. And so Jesus sent the blind man to wash at this pool. From the pool, there are steps that are leading up to the city of Jerusalem, and they've discovered these steps. You can actually walk on the steps that the blind man would have used as he walked down to the pool and then returned back up to Jerusalem, no longer blind, but able to see his way along these steps. But these are ancient steps dating from the biblical period, going to the upper city of Jerusalem from the pool of Siloam. Another water source for the ancient city of Jerusalem was the pool of Bethesda. And this site is only mentioned once in the Bible. It's mentioned in John chapter 5, where we find the description of the lame man who was lame for 38 years at the pool of Bethesda, waiting for the stirring of the waters so he could go and immerse himself in the waters and be healed. And today this pool is commemorated and remembered by a church that dates from the Crusader period, the Church of St. Anne. In the foreground you've got the pool, and in the background you have a Crusader church, the Church of St. Anne. This is the way the pool would have looked like in the biblical period. It would have been a double pool with a colonnaded porch all around the pool. The text in John chapter 5 mentions that it had 5 porches, 5 colonnaded porches, and you can count these porches. A porch on the south and a porch on the north, that's 2. A porch on the east and a porch on the west, that makes 4. And then a porch going right across the center where the dam was between the 2 pools, and that's the 5th porch. And that makes 5 pools, just as the biblical text says, at the pool of Bethesda. There was a Byzantine church built across the pool, and later on a Crusader church built across the pool, and these were built right on the dam between the 2 pools. You can see in this illustration the dam goes through the center with a northern pool and a southern pool in this depiction. And here we have the 2 pools identified in this photograph with the Church of St. Anne in the background, and the Crusader chapel located across the dam of the ancient pool. separating the northern pool from the southern pool. The Church of St. Anne is a lovely place to visit. There are just wooden benches and then a stone floor and stone walls in this pool, and the acoustics are just amazing. You can sing in this pool and just listen to the echo as it reverberates through this ancient church. There's no rugs to absorb the sound, and you can just sing, and I like to sing Alleluia there, and you pause between the Alleluia, and you can just hear it echo throughout the church. It's really a fascinating experience. During the Second Temple period, during the time of King Herod, Jerusalem was growing, and they needed more water. And so Herod built some pools near Bethlehem where water could be channeled from these pools down to Jerusalem. They are called Solomon's pools because of Ecclesiastes 2 verse 6 that mentions that Solomon built certain pools. But these don't date from the time of Solomon, they date from the time of King Herod. And water from these pools was channeled down to Jerusalem by gravity flow. Here's these pools in the late 1800s, early 1900, the three pools. And here you can see the pool today still has some water in it. There are springs in the area that feed these pools. The water was channeled down to Jerusalem through stone aqueducts. And here you see some of these limestone aqueducts. These were all fit together, and they were made in such a way that you didn't even need mortar to carry the water through these stone pipes. And the water was channeled some 68 kilometers from the springs to Jerusalem. This was quite an engineering feat to channel the water from these springs to Jerusalem. And the water eventually arrived at the Temple Mount for the purposes of ritual cleansing. Here we have Jerusalem. This is a lovely photograph. I think this photograph has been tampered with, because if this was a real picture, you'd see the Mount of Olives in the distance instead of a sunset. So somebody has put a sunset, but it's beautiful, and so I wanted to include it. But this is a sunset picture. It's actually looking to the northeast and instead of to the west. And if this was a picture that hadn't been modified in some way, you'd see the Mount of Olives in the distance. But nevertheless, it's a pretty picture. This is the city of Jerusalem, the Western Wall at night. And the Western Wall is where the Jews go to pray. And it's basically a 24-hour-a-day synagogue, 7 days a week. This is a place where Jews go and pray. And it's believed in Jewish tradition that the presence of God never leaves this place. So it's regarded as a holy place. It's the most holy place in the land of Israel that Jews have access to. They'd like to go up to the temple area, but according to the Muslim regulations, they are not allowed to do so, even though some do go up there. And this is the Jaffa Gate at night. Well, I hope I've not overwhelmed you tonight with the information about the land of Israel and the city of Jerusalem. I hope I've just introduced you to this material, and that you will be encouraged to do some further study. If you want to do some further study about the land of Israel, I could recommend a book that I've written, and this is known as the Baker Concise Bible Atlas. And it basically tells you what I present in my classes on historical geography of the Holy Land. There are maps, descriptions of the land. There are other atlases that are more colorful. Mine is just black and white, but it's got good information if you're interested in studying more about the land of the Bible. A very concise atlas was published by Carl Rasmussen. He's got a good name. He's known as Carl Rasmussen, but he also has a very helpful and handy atlas that is available on Amazon. So those are two resources to keep in mind if you want to do further study on the land of Israel. I'm going to pray for you and dismiss you to your discussion time. But Lord, thank you so much for the opportunity to introduce the land of Israel, the land of the Bible. I pray that each one of these students might someday have the opportunity to go to Israel and to experience this land themselves. Help them to see this as a priority. Set money aside to have the opportunity to see the land where our redemptive history came to a point of culmination with the death and the resurrection of our Savior Jesus. Thank you for this time tonight and for the opportunity to introduce the land to these people. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Lord bless you, and trust that your studies will continue with great enthusiasm and joy. Have a good evening.